Gators breakdown. And this is a big one. This is a big one. Episode 109 is ready to go. Florida fires head coach Jim McElwain. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And the band is back together tonight. Co-host Bill Sykes. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. And Will Miles, you can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Guys, I don't think we saw when the season started, about halfway through the season, that Florida would be firing head coach Jim McElwain.
No, I mean, I think, the anticipation was Florida was going to be competitive in the East and that McElwain was going to represent the university in a way that people could be proud of. And I think that was, the comments this week seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, indeed. And as we get into this, I think we'll kind of paint the picture here that these comments were the symptom of a larger problem, as were the on-field results. And this is everything coming to a head. And I think it was just making a proactive decision that I think was the right one. And also, Dave, it's good to be back.
It is. Bill's been moving his family down to Florida, so busy time there. So Bill's back, and I know everybody's been asking and wondering about that. So like I said, we got the band together, and of course, not a better time than this big news coming out from the University of Florida of firing Jim McElwain. And before we dive in, remember, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And hey, when you're on iTunes, please rate and review the show. So, guys, I know we talked, of course, we talk a lot behind the scenes anyway, but we started hearing rumblings Friday afternoon that today was going to be a day that we could see something happening. It was kind of confirmed by a couple sources. There were some message boards out there, and then I started digging around, and of course, I kind of started hearing about it as well from there. So I started trusting what I was hearing. And then Saturday rolls around, that it didn't, and it didn't matter what happened against Georgia, that Jim McElwain was going to be fired. And we go back to Monday with the death threats comment and everything that went on there. We kind of know the summary of that, so no need to rehash that. Georgia wins 42-7 in the game, and everything just kind of fell into place. And Florida put out a statement that they through Sunday after all the rumors were going around Sunday morning of secret meetings, and the meetings were happening, and the UAA and Scott Strickland were meeting against with Jim McElwain. That then we knew kind of something was going on. So Jim McElwain, University Athletic Association, this comes from Florida, by the way. Jim McElwain and University Athletic Association mutually agreed to part ways. Athletic Director Scott Strickland announced Randy Shannon will serve as interim coach throughout the remainder of the season. We want to thank Coach McElwain for his efforts in leading the Gator football program, says Strickland. We are confident Coach Shannon will provide the proper guidance to the players and the rest of the staff during this time, and we will begin a national search for the next head coach. The two parties have negotiated terms of separation. Athletic Director Scott Strickland said those will be kept secret, I guess, for now. So, Will, tumultuous, 2.5 years, tumultuous last few days. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think it's, you go back over the last 2.5 years, and, McElwain didn't win pretty. And that's one problem, is that, Florida's used to putting up half 100, and it took them about 3 games to get that many points over the last couple of years. And there was just always noise in the program, always issues with that. And then, a lot of the stuff that's come out over the last maybe the last week or so is, just the idea that he's been taking shots at the administration. To be quite honest, I didn't remember that, but you go back and look at it, and he had been using the media maybe to emphasize his needs and his desires for the program, and it sounds like the administration didn't appreciate that. So I think they're really going to go out and look for somebody who is going to work within the program, work with the UAA, work with Strickland to build the program rather than potentially around it, which is what it sounds like was kind of going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and listen, man, you know, it's fine to have disagreements internally, but to air out your dirty laundry before you've really come in and done anything, that would rub me the wrong way too if I was involved on that end of things. And so I think it's understandable that created a rift from the university's end, even if they weren't as committed maybe as they should have been. It's one thing to handle it inside, but when you take it out in the streets, you're going to create a problem for yourself early. And now here we are down the road, and you know that came back to bite them, I think.
Guys, I mean, first of all, are you surprised it happened? I mean, I think after I was surprised to hear on Friday that, hey, this is going to happen. I wasn't sure the comments of the death threats comments were really enough. Once that came out, I heard throughout the whole week that there's been some rubbing with the UAA the wrong way. There's been some rubbing with Florida that even through Jeremy Foley's before he retired that there may have been some buyer's remorse going on, and a lot of that was the facility talk you guys were just discussing and running at the mouth of in the public about what he needed, and some people that rubs some people the wrong way about going to the public with it. I mean, what do we take from that? Hey, this happened now. It's 2.5 seasons. You think it was it too quick of a trigger? Was it just right? It surprised me a little bit when we heard the comments Friday that this could happen, but after hearing everything that came out through the 2.5 years, the comment Monday, the team really not looking like it was supposed to through 2.5 seasons. Looking back at it, this is really not that big of a surprise now.
No, and I think the comments from Monday gave Florida the leverage to negotiate a buyout that was agreeable to the people who have to pay the bills. And so had they waited till the end of the year, I'm not sure that you still have that leverage because you let them finish out the season. And so to me, that's probably why it happens now, is that there was, you can come in and say, hey, and that was sort of the report over the weekend. There was some discussion of a buyout, but then there was discussion that Florida was going to try to fire him with cause. And if you get him involved in if you get him involved in a lawsuit, well, that prolongs everything. You probably end up paying the difference between the buyout and whatever the settlement is, just in lawyer fees, trying to get the money. So, I think that's probably why it happened now, is that it gave Florida the leverage to make a change that they felt like they needed to make. And had the comments on Monday not happened, I don't know if they would have been willing to pony up the money that was required, both to pay McElwain and then also to pay the new head coach. And that also factors in, because I don't think Florida's going to go bargain basement shopping for the replacement. And so, there needs to be some cash left over. And there was some discussion during the press conference today with Strickland. They're still paying Muschamp. So, so obviously there's some pressure to get this one right, regardless of what it costs.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think it was just a convergence of factors of why this timing was right. I think in a way that the comments he made and that did expose the rift between him and the university kind of brought things to light. But you got a couple other things here as well. You've got Tennessee that's flirting with getting rid of their coach. Maybe Nebraska, if you're going to target Scott Frost, where he has ties. And so being that first one to jump out of those major programs that are going to be your competition for a new coach, it gives you that leg up to actually come out and start doing things through official channels as much as can be allowed without tampering. And then you've also got an early signing day in recruiting this year, right before Christmas. And so it's going to be very important for Florida to get ahead of that with these recruits and try to hold the 2018 class together as much as they can for the new coach. I don't know that it would have been possible if he hadn't said what he said, but just looking at all of it together, if they knew this was a bad marriage, if Mac wanted out like we've heard and they wanted out, the time was now to do that. In addition to that, if they know it's not going to happen, if he's not going to be here next year, and you let this go throughout the season and he gets a win versus a very bad FSU team at the year, it just muddies the water even more. I think this was the right time. And on top of that, this was a tricky situation because of the perception somehow who don't really look at the ins and outs of what's happening, and they just see the two SEC East titles. You got to act while you have the leverage and the opportunity as far as public perception is concerned. And I think they did the right thing by acting now.
Yeah, if you don't think it's going the right way, then this really did present itself for the perfect opportunity for what happened today to happen. And, Brett McMurphy, he no longer works for ESPN, but he did post. He's been posting and following the situation. He still has his followers and stuff. So, he posted about an hour ago, expect former Florida coach Jim McElwain to receive substantially less than his $12.9 million buyout, perhaps only $4 million of the buyout, because McElwain kept his death threats from university officials and also his agent's reluctance to fight Florida for the full buyout, sources told me. Florida and McElwain officially parted ways Sunday, and the school said the two parties are currently negotiating term separation. Scott Strickland did say that had been determined. Florida officials believe it could fire McElwain with cause, nullifying the buyout completely. UF believes it shouldn't have to pay McElwain anything because he withheld claims about death threats from university officials. After McElwain mentioned his death threats to the media, the university asked McElwain for more details, but he didn't provide any additional information. So UF believes either McElwain made the university potentially liable by not disclosing death threats made to himself, his family, other coaches, or players, or he lied about the death threats. In either case, Florida believes it's a violation of the standards clause in McElwain's contract. McElwain's ability to dispute Florida over the buyout is hindered because of his agent, Jimmy Sexton, ties with potential candidates. Sexton does not want to battle Florida over collecting the entire $12.9 million buyout because he also represents Mississippi State's Dan Mullen, a top candidate to replace McElwain, or could be involved in other future Florida hirings. So, and there was a quote, Sexton won't fight it because it's not in his best long-term interest. So, looks like after that, Brett McMurphy, he's pretty respectable. That's the only reason I kind of went with this. There's and more. So both Florida and McElwain, who came to UF from Colorado State, each still owe Colorado State $1.5 million. One source said UF will likely give McElwain at least $4 million, $3 million to pay off what's owed to Colorado State by Florida and McElwain, with the other $1 million going to McElwain. The standards clause, Florida believes McElwain violated item number 9. It says in part, McElwain must act in the association and university's highest standards of professionalism, competence, personal, professional conduct, ethics, integrity, and morals. As such, highest standards are determined by the president or chairman in consultation with the athletic director. Contract also states Florida standards are at least equivalent to the highest standards, but may be higher than the standards of the NCAA, SEC, and other institutions of higher education. So after all that said, after the way it plays out, and if all that is true from Brett McMurphy, Florida, in a way, kind of got the better end of this deal.
Yeah, I think Matt kind of walked into this with his comments, and if they can get out of this at a reduced rate, then that's more money they can spend on a new coach and support staff and everything else, and not have to collect this much money. And yeah, I think it's absolutely a better end of the deal.
Well, but I mean, at the end of the day, Florida's athletic department makes a substantial amount of money. So, I think the reality is that if they want to make this deal, they make the deal and move forward. I don't know that it would have hindered them, but certainly, again, I think the comments gave them leverage to go into a negotiation rather than having to deal with the lawsuit. I mean, if McElwain truly did violate his contract, then he's actually coming out a little bit ahead because he doesn't have to go through, all the litigation that would come with it. And the part about Sexton's a little bit interesting because your agent's job is to protect your best interests. So if Sexton's conflicts of interest are causing problems, that's something McElwain needs to take up with him, because your agent's job is to protect you. It's not to worry about the next client who comes through. I had actually heard, or I had read somewhere the other way around, that Florida was potentially thinking about, negotiating a buyout rather than firing for cause, just because they wanted to maintain their relationship with Sexton. So I think there's probably a little bit of trepidation on both sides for that kind of thing, But yeah, I mean, I think Florida won this. I mean, anything less than the $13 million they owed him is a win at this point, right?
Yeah, and I don't really know how much it goes into the next hire, but if the less money you have to sit here and pay McElwain, you would assume would help in going on with the next hire.
Yeah, and Dave, listen, that's going to be really important because they've got to go out and show commitment, and they got to rebuff the criticisms of McElwain and show that they are committed to winning and investing. And then that's going to come through who they hire as a head coach. I mean, there needs to be a guy that can come in and affect this program and elevate it. And that may cost some money. So they're going to have to be prepared to spend it.
Absolutely. So guys, I mean, I think this is the part I know Bill's ready for, because how did we get here?
Oh Lord.
That's the point. We talked about Monday But, we all know it's just not about the comments on Monday. If this offense was a top 10 offense, a top 20 offense, and Florida's putting up 35, 40 points a game, and they're winning with a little bit of style, Monday's comments don't matter. I don't care what anybody tells me. They would have found a way to push it, shove it under the rug, moved on with themselves, and get ready for a big game against Georgia. But with the way it looked, the ugliness of the offense, being ranked in the hundreds, when you were hired, there's no kidding ourselves about that. He was hired to fix the offense. It was clear. And it was clear by his comments. And I know he hates it. And I know Florida fans and other rival fans have brought it up. He says he could win with his dog Clarabelle at quarterback. And that's the statement that will always stick with Jim McElwain's tenure at Florida. No matter how much of a joke it was when he was hired, that's the comment that will always stick with Jim McElwain and his tenure at Florida. And then, yes, he won the East twice. He only lost 2 SEC games in his tenure. You kind of just look at it from afar. Hey, that's enough. That's that. What are we doing? But we know what it looked like. We know the projection of this program now. We know where it was kind of headed. So, to me, how we got here is really it's a weird situation. So it's 2.5 seasons, 2.5 seasons in. But we know, looking at the product on the field, that this really wasn't that far of a chance of happening with what Florida fans expect on the field.
Yeah, Will, do you want to throw something out there first before I have the next 8 hours on the floor spouting out numbers?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff you can talk about from the standpoint of performance on the field. I'm sure Bill's certainly going to get to that. But the thing that I think really sticks out to me is that McElwain just didn't ever seem capable of taking responsibility for the things that were going wrong. So after the Michigan game, he said their guys are bigger and stronger. After the Texas A&M game, he said the plan was good, but the execution lacked. And when he was asked about whether his coaching staff was being fairly criticized for the struggles that they had, that was when the death threats comments came out. And so, he's sitting there blaming lack of execution when he doesn't know how many timeouts he has. He's not bringing up those death threats to protect anyone from the threats. He brought it up to deflect blame, and that I think is the thing that really rubbed a lot of Florida fans the wrong way, and I think really turned them against him. And I think all those things combined with the fact that the recruiting classes haven't been as good, combined with the fact that Georgia is looking like they're starting to become a real giant in the East, and people are seeing Kirby Smart turning that program from somebody that Florida's beaten consistently into somebody who's going to be really difficult to compete with. So, I think it's a confluence of events, but, the reality is at Florida, you shouldn't be having recruiting classes ranked in the 15s. They should be ranked 5. And they shouldn't be ranked 4th or 5th in the SEC. They should be ranked 1st or 2nd. And at the end of the day, I think that's probably I think that's the reason McElwain's no longer the coach. And I think all these ancillary things going on just sped up the process.
Yeah, there's just so many things here. And guys, listen, I understand that my opinions aren't going to be the opinions of all of our listenership. And it's okay that we disagree, because I know that those who would defend Mac would say he won 2 SEC East titles. And I know they would also say that he had a lot of legitimate excuses with the injuries and suspensions and all these things. But it feels like there's an excuse for everything. Mm-hmm. It's like, at some point, any of these things as individual excuses could be plausible. But when you have to have an excuse for every facet of your program faltering and regressing, it's a huge issue. I mean, you take recruiting, kind of like what Will said, prior to McElwain in the post-Spurrier era at UF, the recruiting classes amongst the other 3 coaches averaged, they were averaging 2.7 in the SEC. So somewhere between 2nd and 3rd every year. Well, under him, the 3 classes he signed ranked on average of 7th in the SEC. That's terrible. The national ranking average fell from 5.5 before him to 14.7. That's a significant fall. The average number of signees in the national top 250 in each class from about 12.7 to 5.7. So less than half. The average of top 100s fell from 6.7 to 2.3. So that's by a third. And we've only got 2 5-stars left on the roster in Martez Ivy and CeCe Jefferson, and they're going to be gone soon. So we saw, and that's just one area. You look at his record on the field. He's won 5 of 17 games when opponents scored more than 14. You look at the average margin of defeat in his losses. Now get this. He lost games on average by 18.4 points. That is 3 scores. 3 scores. I mean, you just can't. It goes right down the list. He was 4-5 versus the 3 principal rivals, 5-7 if you include LSU, and he won only 4 of his 13 games versus ranked opponents. The product on the field and off the field was falling, and that doesn't even get into the fact that all these players he's recruited, they're now charged with felonies. And while it's like, and again, you say, well, that's not his fault. Well, he evaluated these guys. He met every one of them personally, and again, if it was 1, if it was 2, fine. But when you've got a significant portion of your team and yet another area of your program that's struggling, you have to look at the big picture and say, wait a minute. If some of this was an issue, maybe it's not his fault. But when all of it's an issue, there's a common denominator here.
Well, and talking about recruiting and one big hit that we talked about with him winning the East and all that, there was a lot of the narrative that he's doing this with most chance players. And now you go back and look, and what we're seeing with his players in year 3, yes, we understand the suspension. Yes, we understand the injuries. But when he lost that must-champ defense, no better example than going against Georgia this past weekend. You saw the fall-off, and you saw exactly where the defense is in the grand scheme of things right now. And we've heard that the fall-off from recruiting, well, when you have the suspensions and when you have the injuries and you can't fill them back in with 4 and 5 stars guys, then you really see the lack of recruiting and the depth of recruiting that hasn't been there since Jim McElwain's taken the helm. Yes, there's some good players. Yes, we can always keep you. I mean, you're at Florida. You're going to have some good players, but then you got to back it up with depth. And if you have one 4-star goes down, hey, it's better if you can replace them with another 4-star. So we're seeing just how far it really has fallen. And I mean, y'all know me, going into this season, it was a no excuse type of season. And if you want to give the excuse of the injury suspensions, okay. I mean, I can see it a little bit, but there's still no excuse to look as bad as it does. And just another example of this past weekend against Georgia of how far it has fallen. So, Bill, I know you're a Stars Matters guy, and and when you first came on this podcast, and you've preached that and preached that and preached that, then you've sold me even more on it, more than I even thought of when before I knew everything that you brought to the table. And now it's just it really rears its head when we have seen what we have seen this season so far, with Florida sits at 3-4.
Yeah, and I don't want to sit here, and I know there's been a raging debate between Gator fans, and I'm not going to sit here and say I told you so or anything like that. And I get it, man, and it's just one of those things that it happened, and we're all ready to move forward. But recruiting suffered, and the problem, really about recruiting, when you look across the metrics and you see this steady decline in all these things, and I'll just throw one more out there. The average national ranking differential between Florida and its rivals prior to McElwain was 4.28. So on average, the total average placement that UF had in the ranking over Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida State, they were about on average 4.3 spots above their competitor rivals. Well, now since Mac, it's minus 7.8. So now instead of on average being 5 spots in the national ranking above their rivals, they've fallen to almost 8 spots behind on average. That's on average and not including LSU or Miami. There's definitely a problem. But, now it's time to say, all along we were hearing bad things about the process. And I know Will is big on the process, and we'll talk about that. But when we hear about how they jumped late on Jarrett Stidham, and there were other blue chip quarterbacks that never responded to they could have had, and you saw their approach, which is very laid back. The recruits were just saying, oh, McElwain's not very aggressive in my recruitment. He just wants me, to kind of take my time. You didn't see that killer instinct and that hard drive to assemble these classes, and it indicates a process problem. Especially when I think was just very stubborn, and he felt like he can win with his dog at quarterback. And I hate to throw that back out there, but and he took Del Rio, took Appleby, took Kyle Trask, who had never started a football game, and was content, in whatever you believe about the Will Grier situation. And as he said, she said, but he was content to let him go, was content to not jump on Stidham late, or jump on Stidham early, and some of these other ones he could have possibly had. Well, when you get down the road and you see these process problems, well, now you can go back and say, not only do we have results that indicate there's a problem, but we have signs that maybe you initiated the process that led to these. And so that is a big, big issue. And it's one that I think inevitably played a huge part in getting him fired.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a pretty big supporter of McElwain, particularly his in-game coaching. I don't think it's a coincidence that he's been so successful in close games, though I think that's part of maybe what his undoing is this year, is that he's sort of come back to earth a little bit, and all of a sudden now we see the warts. From the standpoint of you can't solve a problem unless you're willing to admit what it is and actually pinpoint what it is. And so that's the thing that I think maybe disturbs me the most about the process, is the idea that hey, the offense is fine, we don't need to fix anything. Well, no, it's not. And you hear from multiple people that the route combinations are strange, that the timing is odd. You've got your hand-picked quarterback coming in, and he just has not been able to get the job done. And you sort of feel bad for the kid because it just doesn't look like he's prepared out there. And that, again, I think falls on the coaching. The recruiting falls on the coaching, all those sorts of things. So, I mean, I think it's definitive that the process is, and even the in-game coaching has been an issue this year with timeouts and end of half and things like that. So, it's really sort of been a system failure. And I think I said that last week or 2 weeks ago, that it's a system failure. And when the system fails, the coach is the one who's held responsible. And I think in this case, if you're just holding on to somebody who's not willing to admit that there's an issue because of a recruiting class, well, it's time to make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. And Will, you brought up how well now in close games where he's kind of faltered this year. And then the inexcusable not knowing when he has timeouts and that's the and et cetera, going along those lines. My thing is now, with knowing what we know, and we know pretty much there was a amicable parting of ways, that there was the thought that he wanted out. It makes you wonder if he was fully there, if he was fully involved, and he talks about how much he cares for his players, and I'm not doubting that at all. I really do think Jim McElwain cares for his players. Yes, he, inexcusably throws them under the bus in the press conference, whatever. But I do think, if you listen to the players, they say it. And so, but, was he fully invested in the game plan? And was his mind fully there when these games were coming down to the wire and not knowing he has a timeout, and the fourth quarter collapses against Texas A&M and LSU, and not even showing up against Georgia? Georgia's good. Yes, Georgia is a very good team, but that was an embarrassment, what we saw against Georgia, a 42-7 blowout. So, knowing what we know now and how this season has went, it really just makes me wonder, was he just fully invested in this year?
Yeah, I don't know that we'll ever know that, and I certainly don't want to accuse him of that. I think it's sort of, and I definitely think he cares for his players too. I don't want to insinuate that either. But at the same time, I mean, just from a talent identification standpoint, everybody could see on the high school tape that Kadarius Toney was unbelievable. And, they didn't start getting him the ball until the second or third game of the year. Dre Massey is somebody that on tape looked fantastic in offenses before he came to Florida, and all of a sudden looked average, or they just couldn't get him the ball. Same with a bunch of different players. So, at some point, we talked about the common denominator. That's really what it boils down to. And there weren't many changes in the offense coming off of a bye week here either. And that's sort of been the story, is, we're going to stick with what we believe in, and we're going to do what we believe in. And, I'm just not sure that what they believe in is going to win games in the SEC.
Yeah. I'll tell you, man, and it kind of comes down when you look at it, when we evaluate McElwain, what I keep telling people is, okay, let's take all those things out of the equation that we can't know. We can't know about his motivation. We can't know if it was his fault about the suspensions and whatever, what happened with Grier. But what we can do is evaluate the things he can control. And in my mind, There's no excuse for the clock management problems. There's just absolutely none. There's no excuse to not know you have a timeout when the game is, in doubt. There's no excuse that, number one, Franks should not be taking design run carries in this offense when that's obviously his best asset at this point, other than maybe, an occasional deep ball. And the fact that they have not utilized that, to me, is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing. And then the fact that they would keep trotting him out there and the way they've been so stubborn for change in this offense, it just makes me feel like he really believes that it is not his system and it is not his way of approaching things, and he does not believe that there's a problem with the way he's going about things. And over and above the fact that his system may be broken, his unwillingness to adapt change to try to fix it, to me, is a bigger problem. And I think that's ultimately, if you're Strickland sitting there and you're saying, this guy doesn't want Spurrier to help, this guy doesn't want to change the offense, this guy doesn't want to change the quarterbacks, this guy doesn't want to admit a problem, well, then why should we believe the future is going to be any different?
Mm-hmm. And there you go. And that leads me to my next question. Is Florida in a better place now than when he took over? Bill, I know you brought that up, I think, on the last show that you were on. You brought that up. And I really thought long and hard about this. And if you kind of just vaguely look at it, and you look at it by position or by grouping or whatever, offense, well, I think we probably think there's better talent on offense, but the next coach is not getting left with a quarterback as good as Will Grier. We already know that. I think the running game, the offensive line, the wide receivers, I think we probably will agree, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but that's better. Defensive side of the ball, and it's not even close. And we know that for a fact. It's not close at all of what we see on the defensive side of the ball. Special teams, we have a good punter and kicker, but Will Muschamp had that as well. So, broadly, I'd say barely it was probably better when Jim McElwain came in because of the quarterback and Will Grier. We saw what he was able to do there. It wasn't great, but it led Florida to a 6-0 start, and the defense was miles better than what we have right now. Now, from the off the field, the facilities, yep, McElwain got the ball rolling on that. Muschamp kind of got the ball rolling on the indoor facility, but McElwain kind of scrapped that idea, made it a bigger, nicer facility. We see all the facilities, the student life facility and the athletic facilities that are on the way now. That can be, attributed somewhat to Jim McElwain as well. I would say the general feeling maybe is a little better. Definitely, recruiting is on the uptick now, but it took a while to get there. So, generally looking at it, I can't say this program is any better right now than when Jim McElwain was hired.
Yeah, I see it as a wash. I mean, it's kind of indeterminable. I do think the offensive line looks better. Great. There's no proven quarterback on the roster for the next guy to win with. I think the facilities are going to be improving, and that's better. But that's not all McElwain's doing either. It's a wash. And the next guy's going to have his work cut out for him. But at the end of the day, I believe this is a program that a good, competent offensive coach and a guy that can sell his vision can come in and turn things around rather quickly. And I think it can be a rapid ascent for this program.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the Stars, certainly the ratings have taken a hit over the last couple of years, but it's not as if they've been, 25th to 28th. So, you bring in a couple of top 10 classes, maybe top 5 classes, and all of a sudden you've got a ton of talent in the backups and a ton of experience on the guys who are in the game. You see the talent drop off a little bit, I think, on some of the plays where the linebackers maybe aren't as good as they could be in coverage. I think that'll come. I think those guys are talented enough that eventually they'll become good at that. But as freshmen and sophomores, they're struggling there. I think the corners are probably the cornerstone of the defense. The question is, some of these guys on the defensive line are going to graduate or be gone pretty soon, and is there going to be anybody to replace them? So I think depth is a pretty big issue, and that's going to sort of maybe be the focus of the new guy who comes in, is building up the depth, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I think on the offensive side of the ball, Florida's probably pretty solid, other than the quarterback question, which has been a question for an extended period of time. But you look at other programs, and they go out there with guys who are limited physically or limited within systems and still are able to find ways to put points on the board because they put their players in a position to be successful rather than trying to fit them into a system to score. And so, to Bill's point, the idea of running some read option stuff with Franks, just to keep the defense honest. I mean, there were a couple of plays where he handed off the running back and the backside was wide open against Georgia. And, it was clear that he just wasn't allowed, or, that wasn't part of the offense. They weren't going to do that. So I think we'll know 3 games into next year. I mean, I really do. I think we'll know 3 games into next year, because if the offense starts putting up 50, then, the talent is there. It's just a question. It was just a question of fit of the personnel within a system. If the offense is still struggling, then I really think that it's probably a step back, because the defense, from a talent perspective, I think is a little bit worse. And then certainly on the second unit is significantly worse. And so there's going to need to be some depth that needs to be built up there.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, guys, remember, and to our listeners out there, it's not about next year. It's about the long-term trajectory of the program. And while the defense might be better with some experience coming in, and yet their talent might be capped at what they can achieve, and while there's still problems on offense, Florida needs the guy that can get this thing turned around in the next few years and take them in the right direction. Even if he's not a championship coach, just get it going in the right direction. And I believe that's very possible.
Yeah, and that begs the question, of course, going into next year with the schedule, and it could look easier. Jim McElwain, his first game, I believe he scored 61 points against New Mexico or something. So we're like, yeah, there we go. That's what we're looking for. And then you had to come back against Tennessee, and you had to blow out against Ole Miss, and it was, I mean, guys, do you remember how you felt that night after the Ole Miss game? I mean, Gator Nation was rocking. You beat the number 3 team in the nation. Not only did you beat them, you dominated them. A week later, you go to Missouri, and we know what happens after that. Rigorous suspension, and it just seems the program has just been spinning its wheels since that time, and this season even going down a little further, sitting at 3-4 right now. So, a question that I just kind of came up with, when we look 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now, what's Jim McElwain's legacy at Florida? I mean, we know how Florida in the stadium they hang those SEC East championships, and you have the numbers, and the ones that he won are going to be hung there. But we know, I mean, if this Florida team was in the SEC West, they're middling in the SEC West the last couple of years. That team's not in the SEC championship by any means. They had the benefit of playing in the SEC East. Now, don't get me wrong, it was better than the alternative. It was better than being Tennessee. It was better than being Georgia these last couple of years. But we know ultimately, and you talked about the long-term process here, and it wasn't setting up long-term very well. And we kind of knew, we could see what Kirby Smart was doing on the recruiting trail. We knew we couldn't fall further behind. That might be another reason this move was made, because, hey, look, that Georgia team probably isn't going away anytime soon. So you're going to have to keep up with them. Tennessee is going to be making a move. Arkansas is going to be making a move. You're going to have some, more than likely, you're going to have teams, especially another one of your rival in Tennessee, going to make a move as well. get out in front of them a little bit. But if you look at it, what's Jim McElwain's legacy when we get down the road?
Barbecue sauce? I don't know. I mean, you tell me, man. What? And I listen. I've been asking people this, and it's not that he was like the worst coach ever, but
yeah,
what impact has he made? Crickets.
You're right. I mean, like I said, facilities, yay. And if Matt Corral turns out to be something for the next coach, I'll give Mac a little bit of credit. But
I mean, look back. Okay, Ron Zook, great recruiter.
Yep.
Stocked the cupboards.
Yep.
Will Muschamp, dynamite defense.
Yep.
And they could say 100 things for Spurrier or Urban Meyer for that matter.
Yep.
Jim McElwain? Okay. I don't know.
Yeah, the only thing I caution on that is the day that Muschamp left, nobody had anything good to say about him either. So,
no. But I just mean like identity wise, I just don't know where he really put his thumbprint on the program of anything that's going to be enduring.
No, and to be honest, I think the thing that people are going to remember is this whole saga of the last couple of weeks. I mean, I joked I joked during our preview show, Dave, that this is the first time I'd ever seen somebody go on the hot seat during a bye week, and I mean, maybe that's the legacy.
Literally, did we know hot seat meant, hey, he's gonna be fired in a few days?
Well, I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. It's just been weird, and I think maybe that's the legacy. Is the whole thing has just been weird, from the Greer suspension to the just absolute refusal to run Treon Harris,
the shark.
The shark and the response to the shark, the barbecue sauce, like all that stuff. It's strange. And, I don't like, each one of these events is sort of excusable on its own.
Yeah.
But when you add them up in aggregate, it's just weird. And I guess maybe that's the legacy, is it's going to be a strange 2.5 years in Gator lore.
I mean,
it feels like we're on Stranger Things and the upside down.
This is Stranger Things.
It is.
But think about it, guys. Before this season started, we have coaches jumping in the pool because, doing Gator chomps in the pool because recruiting was flying off the charts, and football season is about to start. In July, and you had coaches. You had recruits flocking to Florida like crazy, and the coaches going crazy doing Gator chomps, jumping in the pool. And then fall camp starts, and not too long after that, there it is. It kind of happened right there. We had suspensions, and we got rumors of suspensions and credit card fraud, and all that came about. And then you get your brains beat in by Michigan, who turns out not to be that really good of a team right now. And then it takes a Hail Mary to beat Tennessee, and then Kentucky gives you a game, and then you somehow inexplicably, with the way the game was played out, inexplicably lose to LSU and A&M. And then we get the McElwain family picture with Nebraska hats and everybody jumping off the rails of that. And now the death threat comments and this last week. I mean, since the coaches jumped in the pool when Gator Nation was riding high, since then, it has just been one issue after another, fair or unfair.
Yeah, looking back. Oh, go ahead, Will. Sorry about that, buddy.
I was going to say, it takes a lot to get yourself fired in your third year. I mean, there was no way I thought McElwain was going to be the one who was on the hot seat. I thought Nussmeier might have to be a sacrificial lamb, in order for the fourth year to come. But there was no way I didn't think he was getting a fourth year, particularly with the way the recruiting class was set up. And it really is just this confluence of really weird events that's led to this. And, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, looking back on that recruiting moment when they were jumping in the pool, it didn't really dawn on me until you mentioned that. I didn't think a whole lot about it at the time because we were also happy with this newfound momentum. But the fact that they made a public spectacle and celebration because they had landed a few good commitments, it really speaks volumes. It's kind of like Rod Tidwell on Jerry Maguire, like when Cuba Gooding Jr. was dancing in the end zone, and it really kind of shows you. People may not have thought on the outside looking in that there was a recruiting problem, but that tells you all that you need to know about how they felt about the situation. And the fact that they had to celebrate that, which was not really even something that made it final and official. I don't know, man.
Well, the interesting thing also, I mean, to piggyback on that, Bill, is that, to need to have to put that out publicly, it does indicate that there are some rabbit ears. Right, that they're hearing all the stuff that's going on in the background, and that I think is sort of what's happened and manifested over the last 3 or 4 months. Is just the excuses sort of are a symptom of those rabbit ears as well. I mean, both positive and negative. I know when people would question when they would question the staff until yesterday, it was always, well, we've won the East 2 years. It was never, yeah, we've got things to improve on, we need to fix stuff. It was always sort of going back to the achievements. And I just wonder whether there were some rabbit ears there and that sort of, impacted some of the decisions that were made.
Well, and you talk about the rabbit ears and kind of leading to that, we knew that's why the coaching changes were made last year with Sider, Davis, and Bell. But Bell kind of just because Torian Gray left, whatever. But especially Sider, who was brought in to recruit that South Florida area and making a change down there, and we thought he would be a big difference in recruiting, and it looks like it had paid off a little bit. And Brad Davis, you're starting to hear his reputation about him now as well. So yeah, there were some rabbit ears about recruiting, and then you went and made a change with those guys, and then it turned around. And as Bill pointed out, then they start jumping in the pool, and I liked it, when they started sharing it and stuff. A lot of people were retweeting it. That's my coach and all that, and it was all Team McElwain, and the Michael train was rolling and all that. But then how quickly it has come to a halt.
Yeah, and one of the things about this whole recruiting thing, and listen, I love how fans are passionate and loyal, and they have supported McElwain to the end, even if we disagree about that. I think it's great, but people are very worried about the 2018 and 19 classes. McElwain was selling in the summertime when the pool episode happened about a vision that was going to come to fruition during this season. He was selling how it was right around the corner and things were going to get rolling. Well, they haven't. They just absolutely have not. They have taken a step back from even where he was when he was first selling these guys. These classes were going to take a hit. I'm not saying Matt Corral was going to leave or any individual recruit, but I'm telling you, it does eventually. At first, the win-loss records don't matter, but if they stop buying your vision, it starts to unravel. And I can promise you it was not going to end up as good as you think it was on the current course. I think the best thing for recruiting is that this happened, and it happened now.
And with the early signing period, you're right. And I tweeted this out. Every program in the nation is going to be watching how this plays out for Florida. Not because it's just Florida, but this early signing period, it brings a whole new dynamic to recruiting. And they're going to see how Florida strategizes in going after a new head coach. Because how do you play it now? How do you play with this December signing period of firing a coach? Do you now see more firings midseason? Now we know a lot more factors played into win-loss and trying to get recruiting and all that, but this now plays a part in it. The programs are going to now watch Florida for how this plays out.
Yeah, well, you've already seen that a little bit with Tennessee, right? There's been some reports that Tennessee has upped some of their timelines just because now they're going to be competing with Florida and don't want to get scooped and have Florida pick up somebody that they may want. So certainly I think people are going to be looking at it, and the early signing period has an impact on that. Yeah,
this is uncharted waters for college football recruiting. And just in case our listeners haven't heard, there is, for the first time, instead of signing on, I think it's the first Wednesday in February, I think is when it is.
Yeah.
When you make your verbal commitment official, you sign on a dotted line, and you're legally bound to abide by it for a year. Well, now they're going to have an early signing day. I believe it's December 20th. So you've got 2.5 months prior almost where these kids can go ahead and make it official and get the recruiting monkey off their back. And so the time is short. Florida's got to act decisively, and they had to have considered that. They had to have considered it. And so getting a jump, getting out there and telling Matt Corral, guess what? We got a guy coming in that's got a top offense that's going to help you immediately. But they're going to be watching closely to see who they hire.
Yeah. And speaking of recruiting, before we'll kind of move along here, but hey, recruits so far, most of them have spoken kind of positive about Florida and how it's been, Matt Corral definitely has spoken to keeping this class together, that they want to play together. They want to be Gators. So as of right now, the recruiting class is still looking pretty good for the Gators. And, but guys, it was kind of weird going into this season, and people kind of know threw me out there. The first two seasons, I gave reasons, and I supported Jim McElwain and Doug Nussmeier, and for what had happened in the first two seasons. But everybody also knows that I came into year 3, and my term was no excuses. There's no excuses not to see improvement. There's no excuse not to see progress on the offensive side of the ball, and that's what we needed to see, and that's what we were kind of sold. We thought this offensive line would be better. We thought we'd have a quarterback developed by now in year 3. And I gave Jim McElwain and Doug Nussmeier every excuse in the world year 1 and year 2. It wasn't going to happen anymore. And what I was seeing so far in year 3 really just, put a whole lot of doubt in my mind about the future of the program. So, it does make me wonder if it was at a pulse of the boosters as well. It was 3 years long enough to determine if Jim McElwain was the right head coach for Florida.
I mean, clearly they decided it was.
They were upset for sure. We were hearing the chatter, and it seemed like I think a lot of them had their doubts. And in the last week or so here, there was a wave of just discontent that turned to a desire for action.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly they thought it was. I mean, Florida's 105th in points per game this year against FBS opponents now, after the game against Georgia, and it's even worse when you take out the pick sixes that add to that total. So, I mean, the offense just hasn't gotten better in 3 years, and it's worse than it was under Muschamp. But it is accentuated by the fact that the offense was really bad for 4 years under Muschamp and the last year under Meyer. And so, this fan base and booster organization that's been used to fun and gun and been used to the spread from Urban Meyer, and even under the Zook years, the offense was never the problem. Some of the game management was, and particularly when you were playing an inferior opponent. So, it was just sort of new charted waters. I think that does play into it. I mean, the idea that, if they were scoring 45 points and the defense was giving up 46 and they were losing, I think this is a different story than the fact that they're losing 17-16. I mean, just, 17-16 in the third year when you've got the handpicked quarterback starting. And then even more disturbing that once they brought in Del Rio, it looked like a completely different offense, which means that, the development starts to get questioned. And I think that was sort of maybe the thing that really started making people concerned, because you could always buy into the vision of, hey, when this guy takes over, things are going to take off. But it became pretty clear that Del Rio should have started originally based on the way he played. But he didn't play at all in the opening game. So all of a sudden you start questioning the judgment, and then you start questioning the judgment even more when some of these off-the-field things came around.
Yeah, and we go here to, and I saw SEC Network post this earlier, so the Florida efficiency on both sides of the ball here. 2014, Will Muschamp's last year, offense was ranked 13th, the defense second, and this is in the SEC, by the way. 2015, Jim McElwain's first year, offense 12th, defense 4th. 2016, offense 13th, defense second. Third year of Jim McElwain, 2017, offense still at 13th. The defense has fallen down to 8th. So as we kind of said earlier, it's just the trend is now heading down on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and it's also exacerbated by the blowouts, right? I mean, when the games against Georgia, the games against Alabama, the games against Michigan, the games against Florida State. I mean, and I'm saying games because it's not just one game; it's two games against each of those guys, and really the only win in there is against a Georgia team that was rebuilding under Kirby Smart, and Smart's got them turned around in year 2, and he's got 3 5-star quarterbacks who are going to be on his roster next year, assuming that Eason doesn't transfer. So. The writing was on the wall that things just needed to get better, and they weren't.
The average scores of a Jim McElwain at Florida loss was 33-14.
Yeah.
Ranked opponents, the average score was 28.7 for opponents, 18.7 for the Gators. They lost neutral games by an average of 26.9. Actually, not even the losses. Wins and losses combined, the average score was 26.9 to 17.9 at neutral site. Outscored away games. They did do better at home, outscoring their opponents 27.9 to 14, but that includes your cupcakes. It just wasn't getting done. It just wasn't getting done.
Ouch. I didn't think we'd be here doing 2.5 seasons in, and before coming into year 3, didn't think after a canceled game and Gators are 3-4. And we're talking about Florida going after a new head coach. So before we sign off here, guys, of course, we kind of have to – well, anything else before we look forward a little bit?
Some people were asking for some names. Can we throw out a few names that we're considering without getting too in-depth?
That's exactly where we're going. So, of course, everybody knows the usual names out there, and those names will be thrown around at length, of course. Dan Mullen, Scott Frost, Mike Norvell, Chip Kelly, Bob Stoops, because I guess you could kind of throw Charlie Strong in there too, as well as the names that are going to be thrown around the most. Dan Mullins, his history was athletic director Scott Strickland. The quarterbacks he's developed from Alex Smith to Tim Tebow to Dak Prescott, Nick Fitzgerald, who's there now, and Mullins, of course, history at Florida as offensive coordinator under Urban Meyer. So that seems to be the most natural fit, of course, but you don't know that, Scott Strickland was asked in his press conference about their relationship, and he didn't go into too much detail, but he said pretty much that they butted heads a little bit, but, it's expected between an AD and a head coach there. That's kind of what I got from his comment there. Scott Frost, UCF, has them undefeated right now. Turned that team completely around from going winless 2 years ago, and now they have the top offense in the nation. So his name will be brought up. Can Florida keep him away from Nebraska if that's the way he's going to go? Mike Norvell at Memphis seems to be a hot name as well. Hot young coach, took over for Justin Fuente, who's now at Virginia Tech. Still got that offense rolling, and a very exciting offense there. Chip Kelly, we'll kind of see, does he want to get back into college football or not? We know he doesn't really like recruiting. Ultimately, if you go around and ask about Chip Kelly, he still wants to be an NFL head coach. So is Florida taking a chance there of, if he comes in and wins a title, I don't care. Go to NFL after that. Just get me a trophy before you leave. Bob Stoops, he's retired for a reason. In my opinion, I don't think if it takes money to get him here, like if he's wants to be the highest paid coach just to get him here, is his heart in it? Is his head in it? I don't think he would take it if his heart and head wasn't in it. But it's still a risk to me with him being retired. If he really wanted to coach, I'd still think he'd be the head coach at Oklahoma. So, Will, I know you got a few guys to add to that list, and Bill, I'm sure you can expound on the guys that I've already mentioned and the guys Will's about to mention.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing I'm looking for is if Florida wants somebody with a proven track record, then you got to go after guys who have built programs thus far. My biggest concern with somebody like Norvell is he took over for Fuente, and he's been there for 2 years, and he's been coaching Fuente's players with, I would assume, Fuente's offense. And, he may be an unbelievable coach, but he doesn't necessarily have the program building aspect. It doesn't mean he can't do it. It just means that if what you're looking for is somebody with an established somebody who's established building a program, he's maybe not the place you go. I mean, I'm an alum of Virginia Tech. I did my graduate school there. So part of me would hate to see Fuente go, but I'm a Gator first and foremost. So he's the guy I'd pick first if you had your druthers. But it doesn't really
before you move off there, he is my top choice. I just don't think he's coming.
But the other people who have built programs that are pretty impressive, you look at Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. He took over for Les Miles, and Les Miles was taking them to sort of lower tier bowl games. And Mike Gundy's winning 10 games pretty regularly at Oklahoma State, which is really the secondary school to Oklahoma in that state. And he sort of brought them not quite on par with Oklahoma, but they're nipping at their heels pretty good. You look at Willie Taggart, who went out to Oregon, but certainly has experience recruiting in South Florida. I don't know whether you'd be able to get him to go. Probably a pretty big buyout there. Certainly, there's been some mention of Charlie Strong, Dino Babers at Syracuse, and then Mullen. I mean, I think Mullen building that program at Mississippi State, and that's a pretty impressive thing, particularly taking over for Sylvester Croom. The other thing that I don't think Florida should necessarily shy away from is looking at the NFL and finding assistants in the NFL that they think are potentially young and energetic and can come in and recruit the area, but have the chops to say, hey, I'm going to get you into the league. So somebody like Matt LaFleur, the Rams offensive coordinator, who's come in, and I mean, him and McVay have completely turned around Jared Goff. And so, somebody like that might be somebody that Florida would want to look at as well. That he has no program building experience, but he's 37 years old. He's young. You would imagine he'd be energetic and be able to recruit. So those sorts of things, I think are things that Florida can be looking at.
Hey, Bill, before you jump in, and I want you to answer this. Does it have to be an offensive guy, or can you get somebody like Gary Patterson, who's known for his defense, but was able to go get some good coordinators and build off of that? Charlie Strong's a defensive guy. His name's brought up. Dang, I forgot who there was another name I was about to throw out there, and I forget. It slips my mind. But does it have to be an offensive guy, or would you feel better if it was an offensive guy, or can it be a defensive guy, but he needs to have the reputation? Oh, Bob Stoops was the other guy I was thinking of. Defensive guy, but of course, had a high-flying offense. Remember Sam Bradford, Florida playing in the national championship game against those guys. I mean, does it have to be an offensive guy?
I think you kind of hit it when you mentioned Stoops. If it's a guy like Stoops that has proven and a long track record of winning, having effective offense and defense, and that it's just a CEO type coach that's proven, like for real, then yes. But I don't think I think that the problem is if you start looking at Charlie Strong or Patterson, anything but the very best of them, that is a risk because the identity and culture of the program right now, it's a long-term deficiency on offense. And so unless you're getting that guy, no, I just don't think you can take a risk on a guy that's 2-3 years removed or even 4 or 5 years removed from being a defensive coordinator if he doesn't have an extensive offensive production track record. So I don't think it will be Charlie Strong, but in large part just because of the timing, he hasn't had enough time to rebound from the Texas debacle, whether or not that was his fault or not. I'm looking for 3 things. I'm looking, number one, first and foremost, as a dynamic recruiter. Because, we mentioned earlier Ron Zook's identity and his legacy was, okay, he couldn't get it done, but he left the cupboard fairly well stocked for Urban Meyer, and it springboarded them into national championships. And so I always look at that. If you hire a recruiter and he doesn't work out, he's at least setting up for the next time. And again, it's about that long-term program trajectory. So he's got to be a good recruiter, especially after what we just had happen here with McElwain. Number 2, I do want an innovative offensive mind. I want a guy that's going to be forward-thinking, that's going to harness the tools he has and start to change this culture and stigma around the Florida program, because I believe that is almost as important as hiring a guy that's a proven winner at this point. I really do. And then, of course, I want a proven program elevator. I want a guy that we've looked at and seen, okay, this is an individual that has shown the capability to go out and take a struggling program and elevate them and leave them better than he found them to win with them. And that's what concerns me about Norvell, is that, like Will mentioned, he followed a good coach and is still winning there, but we just don't know if he is a guy that can come in and fix problems and right the ship. There's no track record of that. Not saying he can't do it, not saying he would end up a bad hire. Maybe he is the next Spurrier here. But when Spurrier came in, he had a conference championship, and had some success at multiple stops. So I see people mention him as a Spurrier clone. I don't think I don't think it's a good comparison. The guys that I'm looking at, if you can't get a Fuente who checks those boxes, if you can't get the proven guys, the heavy hitters that are going to cost you $5 or $6 million, if you don't have that much money to spend, because Florida may not, that's just a reality. I'm looking at Scott Frost first and foremost. He's a guy that his yards per play rank, when you look at 2013 through 2017, which is 3 years as offense coordinator at Oregon, 2 years as head coach at UCF, the yards per play rank were second, 5th, dropped to 125th for his first year at UCF, and now is back to 2nd. And Will, we talked about how rare it is for offenses to make a giant leap. To take yards per play rank to go from 4.68 yards per play in your first year at 2016 at UCF, which prior to that was an 0-10 team or whatever it was. Now they're averaging this year almost 8 yards a play, 7.93 yards a play. That is remarkable. His scoring offenses have been 4th, 5th, dropped down to 66th the first year at UCF, now back to 1st in the nation. That is a guy who has taken UCF and turned them around. He has them in the national spotlight right now, buzzsawing people with a wide open offense that I think suits Florida talent very well. I'd like to see a spread. I'd like to see some option concepts. He's a guy that I think could be a great hire, and he's recruited Florida. He's moving right up the street from Orlando to Gainesville if he takes that. I think it's a better fit for him than a lot of people realize. Beyond him, kind of going back to the established guys, I think Dan Mullen is a guy that people might, poop on the guy a little bit for, not winning huge at Mississippi State. But he's only had 2 losing seasons at Mississippi State in 9 years. The guy developed Alex Smith, Tim Tebow, and Dak Prescott. If anything has been a problem at Florida, it's been the quarterback position, and he's a guy that has a huge track record of success there. So those are 2 I would look at. Beyond that, maybe a Dino Babers, guy that has turned around 2 programs at, I believe it was Eastern Illinois. Took them from 2-9 to 7-5, then 12-2, and also at Bowling Green has had similar success. So, I think those are 3 guys I would look at, including others, including Norvell.
I think the optics of Frost are pretty good too, because right now you got Florida and Florida State both struggling, and then you've got UCF and USF being sort of the cream of the crop along with Miami. And so to take their head coach and bring him into Florida, I think the optics look good. I saw a video of Frost running option. He was preparing his team by sitting there at quarterback and running option, and sort of having the guy back there and being energetic and interacting with the guys that way. I think, again, the optics look really good. So I think Frost. I think there are a lot of people who are probably good choices, but yeah, I like what I hear about there.
Yeah, and if you ask around, Scott Frost is the next big thing. And I'm located here in Florida, of course, in Jacksonville, and he's just right down the road. But the people I talk to and the people I can interact with, they are really high on that guy, and they really do think he's the next big thing. So we'll see what happens with Nebraska, and they're probably going to have an opening. They may have already started discussions with him, so we'll kind of see what happens there. But Mullen and Frost are probably my top two right now as well. I really think Dan Mullen and his QB development, which is what Florida really, really, really needs at that position right now. The talent he can get at Florida. He's familiar with the SEC. He's familiar with SEC recruiting. He knows what it takes to win in this conference. It's a shoe-in. I don't think he comes in and has to rebuild the Florida program. And I think he can take some pieces and get something going right away at Florida. So that's why, and I think Frost can kind of do the same thing with how innovative he is on offense. So that's why those two guys are my top. But Mullen, just really a plus for him is just really knowing what it takes in the SEC.
Yeah, the one thing about Mullen that I would look at as a negative is if you look at his recruiting classes since he's been there. You've had a few that ranked 8th or 9th in the SEC, but normally it's around 10 or 11th, and that worries me just a little bit. And I know that he's known to be, in some circles, as a little bit of an abrasive personality. I think he's got no offense, Will, but I think he's got kind of a northern outlook, And, but I wondered, does the administration at UF want to bring in another guy that might be a little abrasive and give them pushback at this point? And a guy that has not won huge. He's done huge things at Mississippi State. Again, I'm promoting this guy as a possible, but there are some concerns, just like there are with all of them. Scott Frost has been a head coach for 1.5 years. Right. So none of these guys, I think, come with this Urban Meyer pedigree to where they've taken and also ran to a BCS bowl and their second stop, and they've got 5-6 years in the championship pedigree. But there's some very reasonably exciting picks here, and I think you'd find some good things to be excited about with each of the guys we mentioned.
What about Willie Taggart? I mean, I know we brought his name up. If they could get him from Oregon, would you be happy?
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't mention – I didn't think that was really a possibility. I think the guy's a great coach. There's question marks there too, and I know they're 5-4 right now. But it's a first year there. But all that said, I just don't think he's coming. I don't think he pulls a Lane Kiffin and leaves him after 1 year. I just don't think he's that kind of individual.
Yeah, I don't either.
No, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I mean, you explore all your options, right? I mean, that's why I mentioned the guys in the NFL. I mean, Frost is the guy who's being mentioned right now along with Mullen, but that doesn't mean they're the best fit. And that was one of the good things about the press conference today is that Strickland very clearly and repeatedly said he was going to hire the best fit for the University of Florida, and that he wasn't necessarily he didn't feel pressure because of past picks or the money or any of that stuff, that he was just going to find the best fit. And, it may be that one of these guys or somebody not on this list is just the best fit for Florida. And that's fine. But obviously, these are sort of the guys with the track record, the guys whose names you've heard. And so that's sort of what people will be looking for right now.
Yeah, and listen, University of Florida, I think Forbes put out a list where they had like $74 million and almost $75 million annual football revenue. If you think for 1 minute they don't have an army of people reaching out, through multiple variable channels and doing their due diligence and casting a very wide net, you're crazy. We hear these rumors about these few individuals, but this is it's a big business. That's what it really is. It's a huge business that brings in a lot of money, and they're gonna put a big, sizable, orchestrated effort into finding the right guy.
Yeah, and I don't buy. And a lot of people were asking the press conference, is Florida a desirable job? Did the recent events make Florida any less attractive? Maybe it's the bias in me. I don't think so. I think Florida's still a top 5 job. You can come in and win here. You got the talent. You got money. You got facilities that are on the way. Yeah, I don't buy for any second right now that you can't come in at Florida. You wouldn't have support at Florida, and that it's a less desirable job. I think everything is still within grasp of winning big at this program and winning big pretty quick.
Yeah, well,
I would clean portalets for $4 million a year.
Well, and I mean, if you're really that worried about it, then negotiate a huge buyout and then don't submarine yourself in the middle of the season. I mean, Florida doesn't get rid of McElwain, I don't think, without the ability to negotiate down that $13 million. And so, the way to protect yourself is to put a big buyout on the back end. And certainly if they think they've got the right guy, I think Strickland will be willing to do that.
Hey, Bill, the city of Jacksonville, after Florida, Georgia, they might pay the $4 million for those portalet cleanings, by the way.
So. They might, and I'll do it. Yeah, I hear people say that. They're like, if you fire this guy after year 3, no one wants to come here and make $4 million as the head coach of a major football program. I'm like, you're crazy?
Exactly.
I mean, if you're making $1.5 million at UCF and you have a chance to make $3.5 million at Florida and set your family up for generations, you're going to do it. You're not going to be like, well, I don't know, they got rid of McElwain. Come on, man.
Well, the other thing is McElwain's going to get another job.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that he's going to get another job. So it's not as if this has perpetually disabled his ability to be a football coach in college football. He's going to get another job, and who knows where it'll be, probably on the West Coast, I guess, is what people have been talking about. And he's going to be fine. Again, it didn't appear to be a good fit, particularly with this administration. That doesn't mean he won't do a good job someplace else. He hasn't irreparably harmed his career. He just, it didn't fit. He's going to move on. It was a mutual decision, according to Strickland. You can take that for what it's worth. But, I mean, it didn't seem like McElwain necessarily had some of the energy that maybe we would have liked to have seen. So he's going to be fine. I don't think this is, even if you came to Florida and they fired you after 2.5 years of being here, you would have made $15 million and you'd go get a job someplace else because you've got an established track record as a coach of a major college program. So I just don't see that as being an issue at all.
Yeah, and you can sell barbecue sauce.
Yeah, and it could have been just as simple, Will. I mean, I don't want to make it sound as simple as that, but you know what? This really could have just been just a bad fit. Honestly, when it's all said and done, it could have just been a bad fit. It was time for him to move on. It was time for Florida to move on.
Bye.
Ouch.
I've been on the bandwagon for a while.
I know. Hey, I have to give my friend Josh a shout out too. He's a Georgia fan, but he called this year one. He said McElwain wasn't going to last at Florida. So, and that was really no bias coming from his side either. He just didn't see it. So.
And while we're on that note, I just want to give a shout out to my friends Ben and Matt. They're next door. We're staying at a hotel with work, and they're Georgia fans. And
so if you heard the Georgia fight song earlier,
they have literally been trying to get in my room and interrupt the show with the Georgia fight song. I need Secret Service or security or something.
Yeah. By the way, at that game, man, I tell you. With all the news that was coming down, almost every Gator fan was on their cell phone before the game. It was very quiet on the Florida side during the game, as you can imagine. So it was by far the worst Florida-Georgia game I had ever been to. Now, don't get me wrong. I had a great time tailgating. Dustin Woolbright offered me a ticket. He and I went together, and we actually tailgated with Tony Aguilini, so I got to finally meet Tony in person. But we all had a good time. But you know what the talk was before the game, and it just kind of course, the game itself subdued us even more.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten. I owe Dustin some barbecue at Sonny's, but we'll make do on that soon. When I get out of my safe house here in Atlanta.
All right, guys. Anything else before we sign off on this one?
No, but we'll definitely have some extensive coverage moving forward. On these coaching candidates. I've got a lot of numbers I've already broken down, and we'll get further into that. And I believe we're going to get a good guy in here.
How about you, Will?
No, sounds great. Just appreciate all the interaction from everybody. And certainly it's, before, during, and after the game, it was interesting. And I had something to do with my kids, so everybody kept me up to date on Twitter.
It was kind of funny because I forgot you were doing it. I'm sitting here texting you. I'm like, oh, man. I realized like midway through the third quarter that I was like, man, I forgot Will had something to do as I was complaining about play action passes on 3rd and 19.
No. It was fine because a bunch of people on Twitter were texting me in capital letters, "Do not watch, do not watch." So it was sort of dead man walking as I was walking back to turn on the DVR after the kids went to bed to watch it for the first time because I already knew what was going to happen. But Florida had their chances and just wasn't able to take advantage.
Nope.
I'm not even going to comment on the game.
Yeah.
All I'm going to say is I'm interested to see what Shannon does with the team because he has absolutely no pressure. And I'm interested to see if he rotates quarterbacks or, he might just go buck wild with the offense. So
I think we'll discuss that on the next episode. We'll try and do another episode tomorrow. So we'll discuss Randy Shannon taking over as the interim, what can happen at the quarterback position, Malik Zaire, Felipe Franks. And I would assume Florida, not that I know of, we've been doing the podcast. I haven't seen a schedule. Randy Shannon may talk to the media tomorrow as the normal Monday press conference. So maybe some more newsy news coming out on Monday for the normal press conference there. So, guys, thanks so much for joining me on this one. This was a different type of episode I didn't see us doing.
Well, I'm sad and I'm happy, but it's good to be back, man. It's good to be back. And I guess I'll be joining you tomorrow now.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll be back then.
Okay, good. And then Will, of course, will join Wednesday. We will talk Missouri game, but of course, guys, with the news that we're talking about now and the coaching change, it's still we would definitely preview the Missouri game a little bit, but we have a little bit more to talk about and what's coming next for Florida. So for Bill, you can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. And Will, you can read his stuff on SEC Country. Give him a read there. He has a Georgia Review and, of course, some articles coming out later this week. You can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And we're going to sign off on this episode after Florida fires head coach Jim McElwain. Thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown.